with the initial like World Wide Web, you have a very thin protocol layer, and then you have huge stacks of applications built on them. So something like Facebook is built on a very, very simple like HTTP protocol. Whereas with kind of Web3 and the interoperability, the idea is the protocol layer is already kind of providing applications, and then what you can build on that and what can interoperate with that becomes much more high density and high impact.
As role models for future generations, we're building a world where wisdom and consciousness rise, harmonizing life with nature and all species. Join us. Together, let's create a balanced, sustainable future for all.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to another week of TLL Fireside Chat. Today, I'm joined by Vishal Kapadia, and I want to thank you for joining us. We're going to be talking about ReFi, which is regenerative finance. And writing this article that we posted in our TLL website this week, it was kind of cool to find out that I learned about ReFi in the Web3 in the Web3 community when I first started getting involved and looking into it. But then as I started doing research for the article, which is like a primer on ReFi, I realized it wasn't just like a Web3 thing. It actually is a bigger subject about how to go into regenerative finance and what it can do for green tech and so forth. Now, I had originally approached it from the sense of blockchain, which is, again, where I heard about ReFi for the first time. But it was interesting to learn that it's not just about the technology, i.e. blockchain, it was also about the methodology and the way of thinking. And so one of the groups that I've worked with in the past to talk about how Web3, blockchain, and all of that does good in the NGO space is endowment.org. I've met with many of their staff in the past. I was just telling Vishal, they've always made me feel part of the community, which has been an amazing experience. And so I really am thankful to that group and the work they've done. I first talked to Zach, who's one of the founders, October 2022, and the amount of impact and change that Endowment has gone through in about a year and a half is amazing to see. But today we're going to focus really on blockchain and what blockchain can do for NGOs, for SDGs, and just doing good in general. And so, Vishal, with that, thank you for joining us. And one of the things I always like to start with is just getting a sense of who you are and why and how you ended up here.
Yeah, nice to be here. Thanks for having me, and nice to see some of the faces in the audience as well. Happy to just make it interactive to the extent that you'd like to. So I'm actually based in Rome in Italy. I'm from the UK and kind of lived across Europe for a bunch of time. My undergrad was in psychology and neuroscience, and I ended up going into strategy consulting, and then entrepreneurship kind of grabbed me within months. So I've been kind of in the non-profit tech space for probably about 11 or 12 years, directly engaged. And in the crypto space, I kind of started dipping my toes 2015, 16, 17. And I've been working kind of probably in the regenerative finance space since 2021. So my background's, like I say, psychology, neuroscience, into marketing, into business strategy. I run a couple of companies. Love to get into companies at the early stage, trying to find that product market fit. And with Endowment, we're kind of already finding some market fit. We've got about 75 million in donations. Started off with crypto in 2020. I joined the project last May. And we're looking to kind of make it easier to give with different types of assets for next generation donors, and just making that process as easy, as simple, as exciting, as fun, as streamlined as possible. And we've integrated like completely on chain to start with. And that meant that the first assets we accepted were crypto. Since then, we made it possible to kind of sign in not just with a crypto wallet, but also with Google sign in and normal web signing processes. You can also kind of donate any asset really now. So whether it's using a credit card or digital payment mechanisms or stocks, we're also looking at kind of more complex asset acceptance as well. It's all possible, and we serve every cryptocurrency as well. So any cryptocurrency we pretty much accept. The way that it all works is like on the platform, you can donate a cryptocurrency and it can get swapped to USDC, which is a dollar stable coin issued by a company called Circle. And then you can either keep it in a donor advised fund or directly donate it. And yeah, that's kind of where the 75 million of impact has come from. And that's kind of where my journey has met endowment as well.
Great, thank you. And I know endowment works mostly with the idea of donations and kind of expanding the donation revenue space from just traditional models to going into crypto, NFTs, and other things. And that really kind of leans back into blockchain. And as you've been through, we talked a little bit, and if you look through your kind of LinkedIn profile, you'll see that you've been in different environments. You've worked on UN projects. Like, how do you see blockchain supporting organizations that are looking to do good in the world? We'll talk about ReFi a little bit later, but just in general, what's your overall take on blockchain and what the value proposition is?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I think I've said this before on another sort of podcast, that one of the things I work quite closely with the Sustainable Development Goals, but also like all the reporting frameworks that corporations kind of look at when they're looking at sustainability reporting. So I was running a nonprofit called wikirate.org from its inception from 2013 to 2018. And with that, I was, going to all the conferences, like working with like all of the big standard setters on how to model the data that companies are publishing, make it more broadly accessible. And I think this is what took me into the UN sphere. We did a lot of research with students, with nonprofits, like NGOs actually, like doing research on companies. And it's really interesting to see that there was a lack of interaction around the data. There was lack of publicly available data. And I think when blockchain started to really take off, I actually got into a pre-ICO data kind of blockchain called Ocean Protocol that was local to me when I was in Berlin in Germany. And just seeing the way that data was being handled and the way that interactions were possible on the blockchain on a new database system that's modern and implemented for the needs of today rather than kind of legacy needs. It just kind of switched and flipped the switch for me in terms of what's possible. And I think that's what started my blockchain journey. There's a lot of resistance to change in structures, institutions, and the interoperation between institutions. Like I was watching kind of the UN PRI, Principles for Responsible Investment. They got something like 2-3 trillion of dollars of capital supposedly like committed to the SDGs. But in practice, what did that mean? It meant that they were maybe filling out one piece of paper a year and talking about what their commitments were. Similarly with the global compacts, we were seeing, companies making big commitments, big changes, but then the ability to kind of measure that, to compare was quite hard. So I got into the ReFi space around carbon offsetting as well, which was very interesting. And there's a whole raft of ReFi kind of companies trying to make the climate problem more accessible, more like particularly around carbon credits. There's a few big players there trying to bring them on chain, make it more transparent. That's a whole political exercise as well, and there's a lot going on there. And for me, like what's really interesting is seeing direct impact and seeing direct interaction with kind of a sustainable business model as well, which brings me to kind of where I am now with endowment, and like a very exciting kind of journey to actually see real impact, see a real business model, which is super important for sustainability of organizations in this space, and impact and growth of impact.
Yeah, I when I got into blockchain and Web3, one of the things that kind of caught my attention was the idea of a public ledger, right? A lot of people don't realize that blockchain really is a public ledger where information is shared in a way that is made available and accessible in a non-fungible manner, right? You can't change it. Once it's locked in, it's locked in. And that's this concept of chain with its links always kind of being added on, but not being able to be broken. And so I know it's been used in transportation and logistics and modeling and so forth. But when you start kind of applying that to concepts like carbon offsets, right? It's like, okay, how do you know that someone has actually planted a tree that now is offsetting a certain amount of carbon that is then connected to someone who bought that carbon offset so that that tree can be protected, kind of thing, right? And so being able to do that in a way that allows public scrutiny and allows it to be distributed so that it cannot be altered in one system versus another system, I think is where the value of blockchain comes in. And I know recently, especially with AI, I've started to see a lot of people talking about DLTs, decentralized ledger transactions, but that's on the blockchain, right? And so it is kind of interesting to see some of these and your practical experience in managing and dealing with like the carbon offsets and looking at how blockchain has worked, I think really adds a lot of value. If you think about when you first started with blockchain to where you are today with blockchain, we were just talking when when I first saw what Endowment was doing back in October 2022 to the amount of functionality Endowment has today, the partnerships they've been able to kind of put together, it's like an exponential growth of what's been happening. And I know AI has been getting a lot of attention in the press, which in some ways has been really good for blockchain. At the same time, it also means that a lot of the good work that's happening is also not getting a lot of attention. So I was just wondering, what do you see the differences? What have been the value propositions or killer apps that really have kind of evolved that support green tech and kind of green movement action and transparency?
Yeah, killer apps is a hard one with crypto. I think that crypto is still early in terms of like the apps that are being developed on the blockchain. There's been a lot of companies and protocols and apps that are being built which we leverage and have kind of been killer apps for what Endowment could do. So just to give you an example from Endowment's history, so I mentioned earlier there's a stable coin USDC that gives you a stable store of value on chain, right? There's also Uniswap, which allows you to swap tokens. So you want to basically come and create a permissionless bridge from one token to another. You can use Uniswap for the back end of your app. So I think like tools like this were really helpful to get Endowment started. So it's like the community can build on each other, the apps can build on each other. This year we've seen kind of really interesting, well, last year coming into this year, we've seen really interesting launches. So there's a public goods protocol called Optimism, for example. They have enabled much reduced transaction fees for doing donations or any transaction really, spinning up smart contracts as well. And I think that they're what you call a layer two. So they're not like Ethereum would be a layer one, Optimism would be a layer two, and they've also enabled a layer two from Coinbase called Base. So we work to deploy on Optimism on Base to make it really well connected, like our system to kind of the evolving technology in this space. This is what also allowed us to do, there's something called account abstraction, which sounds quite complicated, but effectively just allows you to sign in with, like, we've allowed people to sign in with like a Google account and things like that. So you don't need like a wallet. So I think there's been a lot of technology which democratizes and opens up crypto and Web3 and blockchain to people who aren't native to it. And I think this is like, for me, the most interesting like suite of apps. Because I think you start with crypto, you start with blockchain, and you have like an interface which maybe like only the more nerdy or the more kind of inclined folks can get onto, which is really important to get something going. But then when you want to get momentum and you want it to get more adoption and you want it to get more mainstream, then you need to kind of make that bridge. And I think that's happening now. And I think that's the killer suite of apps, I would say, rather than the killer app, for me at least.
No, and that makes a lot of sense. I think that the idea is incorporating it to day-to-day life versus trying to make it its own technology. And that's one of the things that I have seen, that more and more it's been moving into that kind of way of thinking where and I guess that's why DLT, the concept of DLT came up, because it's not about making it about blockchain. It's really about how you're using that blockchain, right? And so what the killer suite, this killer suite that you mentioned, and how people are incorporating the technology behind the user interface, I think is really, that has been kind of the big evolution in the space. There are a couple of terms that I know we keep talking about and everything, and so given the idea that maybe a lot of people don't really understand some of the terms, there was just a couple that I wanted to go over. ICO. So, because you kind of mentioned a pre-ICO stage, so can you just kind of tell everyone what ICO is?
Yeah, so I think people are probably familiar with Bitcoin or Ethereum as tokens or coins. In the case of Bitcoin, you call it a coin maybe, but effectively an ICO is something like where a protocol or an app could offer tokens to the market. So it's called an initial coin offering, kind of like an IPO, but with coins or tokens. So I think in the run up to kind of 2017, then 2018, 2019, 2020, there was a lot of ICOs, a whole raft of ICOs, which created a huge amount of capitalization in the crypto markets. Some of it would be people who already had Bitcoin and they wanted to put across the value into something more speculative or more potentially exciting. And some of it would be attracting like new investors into the space. So that's what an ICO is. I think, yeah, I'm not sure if there are any of the terms that you're interested in.
The other one, and I think that before we get to other terms, I think that it's also really important to talk about token versus coin. I know when everyone thinks about blockchain, they think of crypto, and crypto is coin, but really in the blockchain, it's all a token, right? And so I like that you referred to it as a token and then kind of said, many think of it as a coin, because it really is the tokens, and that leads to tokenization and being able to take which some of the ReFi and carbon offsets kind of takes advantage of tokenization. I know Martin also posted something about tokenization in healthcare, right? And so I think that it's really important for everyone to kind of get a sense of that crypto is a token that is used on blockchain, and it started as a reward structure for people who wanted to support Satoshi's kind of concept, right? When he first started, it was a reward token. So it's good that you did that. The other term was layer 2. And I think layer 2 is really important because this is where we start to talk about the integrating of the back end into a front end concept. And so maybe we can get a little bit more into layer 2, because that might also trigger some ideas for folks on how blockchain can be kind of an engine behind the scenes to transparency, documentation, and proof of work or proof of good.
Yeah, that gets into harder concepts maybe, but I think Ethereum's a really good example, because I think the majority of the developers that work in blockchain will find themselves in some sort of Ethereum network, whether it's Ethereum itself or a derivative network that leverages kind of the Ethereum protocol. And a layer 2 is effectively, this is where my technical knowledge would be, not perfect. So let me do my best effort. But yeah, no, I think effectively you've got you've got some problems with a network like Ethereum, which the layer twos pose like solutions to. One was access. I talked about account abstraction and being able to sign in not with a browser like MetaMask or something, but with a traditional kind of modern traditional approach, let's say. So like a Google sign in or a Facebook sign in or something that's well established now. Another thing is the transaction fees on Ethereum are very high. So if you go onto a layer two, these protocols are optimized for faster and cheaper transactions as well, which means you can do more things. So since I'll give you a practical example. So Endowment deployed on Optimism and Base, and we have something. This is introducing another concept, but we have a matching pool on Endowment, which we call the Universal Impact Pool. And this matching pool was funded by donors, and we spun it up with an organization called Gitcoin, a division called Allo Protocol, and this uses something which is called quadratic funding, which is effectively a way of thinking like if I want to democratize voting through donations. How do I do that? If I want to make donations kind of a vote towards where money should go or a matching pool should go, how do I do that? So the Universal Impact Pool is an iteration of this. What was interesting is, smaller donations are harder with crypto if you go on a network where the transaction costs are very expensive. But as soon as we deployed on these layer twos, transaction costs dropped, and we saw a lot more small donations coming in, which meant that it was influencing the direction of grant making for the matching pool without people having to make big donations. So this was like a really interesting, maybe a bit bitty, but application that we saw as well, and starts to leverage some of the new technologies as well.
Well, and in the fundraising space, there's something called giving circles, right? And so, and that is that you get a community of people who contribute a little bit, but then as a group, that is a giving circle, they kind of make a decision as to where they want those funds to go, right? And so there is the giving circles as an example. And then I know we talked about donor advice funds, but those tend to be much larger. Usually in the past, they were run by big corporations, and people would make large gifts and they would collect it and make a distribution, as a grant to someone. I know that Endowment has kind of its own version of a DAF. I think you call it an on-chain DAF. And then the fund that you were just talking about, it just kind of reminds me of a giving circle, but on steroids.
Yeah, so we have the Universal Impact Pool, which is, we call it a matching pool. We also have community funds, which allow you to rally around the cause with others. But I think the donor advice fund for me is the central vehicle that we leverage. And the idea is if you itemize your deductions at the end of the year as a US taxpayer, then a donor advice fund makes sense because you can save money and you can get benefit and generate impacts alongside that benefit effectively. So we've taken this tool which wasn't super accessible or like known for many people unless their wealth advisors had like kind of a route to it or they knew people who would have it or they're at that stage where they've needed to donate stock or whatever, and made it kind of super accessible, one click, pretty cheap as well. Again, that's another thing that the layer 2s enabled, that we can make it really cheap now. So you can open a DAF for free on Endowment. So even if you're not itemizing, you might prefer the way of giving that the donor advice fund allows as well.
So I think that we definitely kind of covered a little bit about how blockchain can be used in kind of donation practices, how it can be used in some of the elements of ReFi. Again, with ReFi, the purpose is more about supporting and financing sustainable initiatives, right? And a lot of those sustainable initiatives might be around circular economies, it might be around carbon offsets. I can't say the other word. I'll get all tongue-tied. But there's other elements to it too. I know when, we were kind of chatting, I'm just going to share this real quick because I think that this was kind of interesting to kind of see is this, this is one of the organizations that you have listed. And my understanding is you have thousands of organizations already available, and people can just claim a page if they are a nonprofit. But this is an organization that's been around since 1996. So obviously before blockchain, right? But they've been focused on protecting the rainforest and so forth. And what I like is that they were able to take advantage of endowment.org to find another revenue stream to support their refi initiatives, right? And I mean, you can see, they've already raised close to 264,000. That comes from donations and grants. You can see the sponsored projects. This is all publicly made of information. It's transparent. You have the information on what they have. You can actually see the transactions, and you were talking about the universal impact. So, you can check into it. You can actually dive into some of the information that's included, and you can see kind of like the distributions, how it all works. By the way, I really like your data visualization. Nice job.
Yeah, it's complex. I know.
And your quadratic funding, and I think that the technology is allowing smaller organizations to do more. And this becomes really important in refi initiatives where a lot of times they're very local and small, right? And so I think that as we kind of get into it, what are some of the things that you've been able to, since you've been with Endowment, kind of participate in and really have enjoyed?
So I've been working on the partnerships end, more in the tech world and more on the kind of how can we increase the impact through technology and through utilizing technologies that are out there. For us now, like I think our real goal is to get more mainstream adoption. So that could be, working with wealth managers who have crypto clients, or clients that are a bit more tech forward in their needs, or modern in their needs. There's this kind of concept of there's a huge generational wealth transfer that we're expecting in over the next 10 to 15 years, where there's an expectation of trillions of dollars of assets transferring from one generation to the next. And I think it's getting to the point where, wealth managers and donors, the shape of what wealth managers might want to offer and what donors might be seeking in terms of a giving experience is kind of changing. Similarly, we're just looking at, so like we did really well in the crypto space in terms of getting people who are involved in Web3 and quite native to the environment. And I think now we've got another bull run potentially that we're seeing right now in crypto. So I think hopefully we'll see more joy in that space again. But it's also making it accessible to people. So a lot of the technology we've developed for that audience is really valuable to anyone, really. So I think it's about making that open. And like you say, you can donate to any nonprofit in good standing with the IRS on endowment. So that's 1.8 million plus nonprofits. And you can search by the EIN or by categories or by the name if you know the name of the nonprofit. If they're not claimed yet on endowment, you can still donate to the organization. And what happens is they'll receive a donation, and we'll reach out to them and let them know that they've got a donation pending that they need to claim. They don't need to have any crypto literacy. They can just take a wire transfer, which is also one of the things that have made us successful. Like we didn't have to onboard a whole generation of nonprofits that have been running for years, as you say, onto like crypto and blockchain. They could just take money that they're accustomed to take. And also you can also donate to nonprofits outside of the US. We partner with Global Giving, who do some pre-qualification on nonprofits to make them kind of compliant. for a US donor as well.
Okay. So normally towards the second half of the conversation, what we do is we'll also open it up for questions. And there was a question from Chris, and this was for you. So she's asking about your academic training, set up to enter into a new venture, and could someone start if they are interested? Does psychology help you troubleshoot professional issues? At a glance, the area topics of psychology and now technology has been activating into look miles apart, or I guess looking miles apart. So I'm interested to learn how you kind of have been able to transition from psychology into tech.
Sure. Yeah, no, that's an interesting question. So I came from a background where, so I was studying at the University of Oxford in the UK, and I had friends who studied English and then became kind of quite senior at the Bank of England or something, in economics and stuff. So I think I come from an academic tradition where what you study assists you with like your knowledge of how to learn, how to apply statistics, how to like problem solve, but it doesn't necessarily dictate your path. And I think that can vary by culture. I lived in Germany for some time, and there's very much a red line between what you study and what you end up practicing. And for me, I've always been interested in entrepreneurship and psychology, and tech. So I think the three do come together in this kind of realm of customer value. So what does an individual value, and why? And how does brand support that? How does the product support that? And then you can take that all the way up to strategy. You can take that all the way up to bottom line. You can take that all the way up to kind of product development and market development as well. So I think that's kind of the way I approach that. I studied a master's in marketing as well, with a French business school. So there was a specialization in kind of luxury goods and the big industries that marketing have added a great deal of value to. And I always suspected, this is something that's very valuable for technology, to be able to understand how to position it, how to brand it, how to make it useful, accessible, and interesting for people. So that's kind of been my journey. Yeah, and I've worked across quite a few different companies in different areas, but that's been the theme. And then I guess I wanted to have purpose in my work. For better or for worse, sometimes pursuing purpose can be painful as well. But starting with kind of things that I was interested, like corporate transparency, sustainability, been really interesting. Getting into the climate space was very interesting, and now endowment is actually quite a good red line from a bunch of stuff I've done before. So that's kind of how I've managed my career and my growth. And I've been in a fortunate position where I've managed to find work, with like varied skills and varied needs as well.
Yeah, I find that a lot of times it really is interesting to see how you can take what you've learned and apply to other scenarios. And I remember at one point, the idea was that people would have 7 to 9 transitions, like professional transitions in their life. With the gig economy, that might even be more now. But if you think about it, there's no way that what you studied, unless you're like, even if you're going into being a doctor or something very specific, the evolution of, okay, well, you might own your own practice and now you're a business, a business owner, right? And how does that kind of play into it? So yeah, I always find people's journey interesting, which is why we like to start with why, and why did you end up where you are and what brought you to it, right? So thanks, Chris, for the question. If anyone has any questions, feel free to raise your hand or type it into the messages and we'll get to them. Now, as I mentioned earlier, Martin kind of mentioned the tokenization of healthcare records and how in some cases it kind of worked. And I have seen that there were a lot of starter steps, right? Where people thought blockchain was going to be the answer to everything. And even when we started the conversation, I mentioned that the first I heard of ReFi was when I got into Web3 and blockchain and so forth. And to find out that ReFi is not just about blockchain, it really is more about the economy model associated with it, right? And do you find that maybe blockchain has evolved, or that people are starting to understand it a little better? Or is it just that the killer suite of apps that you mentioned earlier are going to help organizations use blockchain not as kind of as the front end of engagement or distribution or trust, but more as just kind of like the backbone of being able to track and tokenize action?
That's a good question. And I'll say, like, this is my opinion, not facts for sure. Like, it's always easy to predict the future, and then people forget about it if you're wrong, and remember it if you're right, sort of thing. So I think tokenization is very interesting. I've had experience with tokenization of carbon. I kind of helped coin the term digital carbon, as carbon on chain, traceable on chain, in kind of previous work as well. But like, I think it's very interesting looking at kind of what tokenization brings, and what this infrastructure brings as well. So just first of all, I would say, for me, I think we're still 4 or 5 years out from seeing the real potential and penetration of the blockchain technology into the kind of the mainstream market in full force. I think there's been a huge amount of investment. I think like this year you'll see, like, if you read around, like, there's some, like, the stable coins capture so much market capitalization. USDT, the Tether USD stablecoin, and Circle, the USDC, which are these kind of stable coins that track the dollar. The market capitalization is tremendous. And they're starting to do stuff with that. So they're looking at, the unbanked, and like what you can do with this kind of new currency and new approach to currency. In a similar way, tokenization, like with digital carbon, I think it's quite an interesting starting point, and I think it applies to the healthcare example. You always need you'll always come into a market where there are existing practices, there are existing approaches to particular, like, interactions and potentially measurements of value. And you'll have a kind of a supply demand market around a bunch of interactions. So carbon's a really interesting one, because you have people who purchase carbon credits, and people who supply carbon credits. And in between, you have standards setters. And I think the digital carbon piece is quite complicated. It's trying to integrate into a system which is extremely complex, with a lot of capital from various sources. And to kind of win that market in a matter of months, or even a few years, is very difficult. Where you bring tokenization into a more confined situation, where you can manage the sort of the dimensions, and the dimensions, and the purpose, I think it can be much more applicable much more quickly. But then it's also, how do you educate people? How do you get them to adopt it? How do you make it super simple to understand in people's work? And so I think that's the challenge for all of these things. And I think there's a lot of experimentation going on at the moment.
Yeah, and I've been seeing, the concept of social enterprises has been evolving, and a lot of the groups that are trying to do, TLL included, that are trying to support the SDGs, that are trying to do good in the world. They are kind of distributed models. They are engaged in many different kinds of communication channels. They have lots of different cultural aspects to them. It's finding something that can kind of try to centralize the engagement, or can centralize the complexity of what they're trying to bring to market in a very distributed sense, is, I think, a little difficult. I mean, when you work with a company, that they're being audited, that there's financial management that's being applied, laws that are being applied to that. And one of the things that I think they talk about in ReFi with blockchain is the idea that, if you, for example, there was one example I was looking into. It was the Brooklyn Microgrid organization, right? So it's a little community where people have solar panels, right? And so they are prosumers, they're producers, right? They produce energy that feeds this microgrid. And then there's consumers that buy the energy that's being produced by these solar panels in the community. Well, if you were to try to do that in a very kind of traditional way, it's just individuals working together and forming a group. How do you provide transparency into something like that in the sense that the community members feel that there is transactional authenticity? And so that's where, they use blockchain to be able to kind of tokenize and demonstrate activity and distribution. The same thing I think in carbon offsets is that's one of the things that I've seen too. The other part too is I've seen it we were talking about supply chain management, right? And being able to kind of track sustainability of an organization, or being able to say that you bought from a green company and therefore your product has been done in a way that is green from start to finish, right? How do you demonstrate that in a way that can actually be tracked and made publicly available?
Funnily enough, I actually worked in this space also, and it's a difficult one. I was at UN Human Rights Conference in Geneva for business and human rights, and someone from maybe I shouldn't mention the name of the company, but a very well-known company that does animations and movies and products for kids mentioned that they have no idea who their suppliers are. Like they really struggle with managing their supply chain. This was then because they just had no idea who their supply chain was 1 or 2 degrees out, or two or 3 degrees out. So they had real issues with quality control, and then things like labor standards and things like that was just way out. And these problems are complex. Like being able to track this stuff. What tended to be best in class was companies doing audits with external parties, at least to get that one level deeper. But even that wasn't really sufficient to getting full understanding of the supply chain, particularly for these larger organizations. There was a blockchain kind of company that started called Provenance, and they were using distributed ledger technologies to start to track kind of everything from supply to arriving at the customer. And I think these days you can do more with QR codes and certification, things like that. So I think this stuff is getting more attention, and particularly in areas which are very emotional, like fashion or food. I think you're starting to see some companies differentiating. You have something called the Higgs Index in the US on the West Coast, which was kind of spawned actually by the likes of Adidas and Nike in Portland, in Oregon in general, because I think a lot of the companies were out there, and also they were seeing problems. They were seeing problems that were affecting their business, and they thought, okay, we need to get a hold of this before it gets out of control. And I think there's been a lot of reaction to crises and problems to innovate. And I think blockchain definitely does offer a lot of traceability and transparency. And going on to endowment as well, you were looking at the transaction history and stuff, and each line shows the transactions that were made, the donations that were made. Actually, if you click on the right of that there, you can actually go to the transaction on the ledger, so the actual Ethereum transaction that's being made. And things like this are really interesting. There's also an organization called EAS, and they effectively are doing attestation. I think they're called Ethereum Attestation Service. And this is an organization that we've been looking at. Yeah, there you go. So this shows kind of the transaction that you just clicked on. So this is one way of looking at transactions. Etherscan, or if you're on a Polygon network, then it's Polygon Scan. So Etherscan is for Ethereum. Base scan would be for the layer 2's base, etc. So basically, yeah, and you can also go to the contract addresses for the charities that are on the nonprofits that are on endowment, and you can see what they've received, etc. So this is kind of cool. A thing that we wanted to play with, and I'm interested to play with if given resources and time this year, would be looking at attestations. So the ability to kind of attest impact like a particular donation to a particular cause or something like that. I'm not sure of the demand for it at the moment, but it's something that's come up a lot in terms of like talking to like donors, talking to nonprofits. Like sometimes this comes up quite a lot, and it could be very interesting. So yeah.
That kind of leads to like the proof of staking kind of model and things like that, right? Where the idea is if you're putting resources into something, can you generate an attestation of proof of use and proof of impact? So I think that that would be really interesting. And I do see people trying to hold companies, trying to hold NGOs, individuals accountable, and they want to see these proofs, right? And you know, if we look at kind of you mentioned generational transfer of wealth, right? And if you look at kind of how Gen Z and alphas are engaging and buying and what they look for, it started with the millennials, but it really is kind of becoming part of just how generations purchase and how they engage in space, in the retail space. Influencers have had a big impact on people wanting to buy organic or wanting to buy, you know, I can't remember the badge that coffee, for example, gets, right? But
Fair trade.
yeah, it's. I'm sorry.
Fair trade.
Yeah. So it's that all of those things, and it's not just like you can just stick a badge on. It is they want to see the proof, right? And so it is going to be kind of interesting. We do have a question from Andy Dang. Can you just introduce who your customers are? So who is it that Endowment works with?
So yeah, we're a fundraising platform. So effectively, the beneficiaries of the platform are nonprofits. So it will be the the organizations that you can see that have received funds from endowment, and then the other side of that is the donors. So people who are willing to donate, either have a donor advised fund on endowment or have just done direct donations through the platform. So this is how kind of our stakeholder mix breaks out. And you could argue the customers. You would probably say the customers are the donors, because they're bringing the capital in.
Okay. And we actually have Alex Todd. He's with reliablyme.com. And I know that they're using blockchain also for like attestation in some ways. And he asked, don't donors demand impact metrics? So I know we created transparency. Is what you're talking about with attestation going into donor to impact metrics? Or
Yeah,
is
it
that
can.
separate?
Yeah, so I'm still trying to figure out exactly how we implement something of that nature. Right now, I think traditionally, correct me if I'm wrong, if you've got a different experience or a different understanding, but what I understand is that, impact is tracked on the global kind of level of the organization, but not on an individual donation usually. So if
Right.
perhaps for like, if you're donating to this college or university and it's earmarked for a wing or something, or for a new football field or whatever, like then maybe it's more tracked and more clear. But not all organizations will manage all donations in that way, right? So I think for small donations, like you're probably left with the impact report of the organization, or it's super local and kind of the people and the way they do business. So I think it is potentially interesting to add a layer of traceability or like understanding, like to where donations reach and what they affect.
Yeah, and I think that
Demand is a big word, right? So donors maybe welcome it, but they're also served what they get probably.
Yeah, and you made a good point. Impact is normally measured at the organization, right? So it's the organization's responsibility to kind of really demonstrate impact, and they tend to do it. If you look at annual reports, more and more NGOs have been moving into doing impact reports, right? So instead of just kind of doing a general presentation of traditional old school annual reports, they're making it more of a marketing piece, and they're using it more as an impact report. And so the NGOs take on the responsibility of demonstrating impact. However, I think that one of the opportunities is to be able to bridge the donation and the transparency and action that's happening on one side with being able to bridge kind of the impact on the other side, so that if someone has made a donation to an organization that is wanting to plant trees in the Amazon River Basin, that the impact that is directly related from that organization gets reported back in an easy to consume manner. And so,
Mhm.
and I think that there's other opportunities for third parties to kind of come in and fill that space, right? You're responsible for collecting the donations. The organization is responsible for using those donations. Who can step in to represent the holistic picture, right? So I think that, again, an evolving space where layer two applications will be able to have more impact.
Yeah, I'd be remiss not to share our impact report at the point as well. So I put it into the I put it into the chat. But like, I actually think it's very interesting, like to be able to see an impact report and understand kind of that level of transparency of an organization. I actually think our impact report is quite interesting. So I'd welcome people to have a look and pass on any comments if you've got any questions either in this call or outside of this call. But I think ours is quite interesting because we're doing quite a lot of different things. So we're partnering with NFT communities, but then we're also seeing, like you say, like Amazon conservation charities getting donations. So I think this is really interesting. In terms of like how you solve you close the loop of like tracing and who does that, and so I think that's a really difficult question to answer. I don't know if you're posing the question or not, but like I think it's a difficult question to answer because it's effectively another incentive mix. It's like who has the incentive to do this and how do we do this? And but I think there are probably cases where it could be quite valuable and deemed valuable as well. So
Yeah, no, I think that there's definitely more opportunity, and I think that that's one of the things that I've seen with um, communities that are for transparency and engagement is that once it starts to evolve into more and more. And so little by little, I think we will see a shift and impact. I know I am part of a lot of different fundraising groups and so forth, and impact is always something that they want to talk about. Relevance, right? What's the relevance of the organization and the work that they do? And so it really is going to be interesting to see how the convergence of technology kind of comes together, because it might be an AI tool that takes information from the blockchain in the distributed ledger transaction and then takes information from the nonprofit's website in terms of their impact report and generates a summary of how donations in one location on the blockchain have supported impact in another area through what's been presented. So I think that there is definitely opportunities for convergence of technology. One of the things that I always like to make sure that we think about is that none of this exists in a silo, right? So blockchain is not the solution for everything. AI is not the solution for everything. Um, I really do believe the human stack is part of that mix too. You know, when we talk to Tim Lockheed about the human stack and how does humanity fit into technology, our summit is going to be focused on climate, AI, and humanity, right? You always have to kind of bring it all together. And so while you can use technology and the convergence of technology to kind of facilitate some of this, it's going to be, as you mentioned, kind of the demand, and the demand comes from humans, from humanity. So it's going to be interesting to see how that evolves.
yeah, I think the changing like holders of wealth is also interesting, but this intergenerational wealth transfer and also, you know, where younger people are making their money at the moment probably affects the demographics of potential donors at the moment as well, which is something that we're quite interested in because there's also a very captured market around like say donor advised funds where I think something like 40%, 50% are captured by a handful of wealth managers, like investment managers, the big names, the Fidelities, the Vanguards, etc. And I think it's interesting to see how that will emerge and how that will shape up over time.
Yeah, and that's why I've been so interested. And I remember when I first talked to Zach, he actually ended up putting a little Venn diagram for us, right? Where we were talking about the Web3 community and the fundraising, doing good community, and this kind of overlap. And the overlap is pretty large in the Web3 community to doing good. And so, it the community definitely is moving in the direction of doing good, and it's generational. It's just necessity, right? Like the SDGs are a real thing that really need work, and um, the next generations are going to be stuck figuring it out.
I have an anecdote on that, which is I graduated at university and I was in New York on holiday, kind of traveling a bit, and I went to the UN and did the tour. And at that time, there was the Millennium Development Goals, and I just asked the tour guide, how are these things being tracked? And the exact response was, we don't talk about that." Which was really interesting because then, as I saw the kind of the sustainable development goals come through, we were working on I was working on how to track these things, and they're very difficult to track. And the amount of capital required and the funneling of capital is huge, and the motivation of large groups of people is the coordination problem is real as well. So yeah, and I think that one of the interesting things about blockchain, if you think of it as infrastructure for society in the refi space, and mobilization of capital and people and purpose. There are a few concepts in Web3 which fit quite well with some of the problems. So one of the problems is always trust, right? So I think the idea in crypto and blockchain, there's a very strong ethos of trust but verify. So people can just get on with things. And another thing is being permissionless. So leverage like the technologies that's out there. And I think these two concepts together are quite valuable. So you create, and I think open source software principles has fed a lot into kind of the way that blockchains develops. And one of the most compelling kind of theses around blockchain for me was there's the ex-CTO of Ethereum, it's a guy called Gavin Woods. He's running another project now. Said something along the lines of, with the initial like World Wide Web, you have a very thin protocol layer, and then you have huge stacks of applications built on them. So something like Facebook is built on a very, very simple like HTTP protocol. Whereas with kind of Web3 and the interoperability, the idea is the protocol layer is already kind of providing applications, and then what you can build on that and what can interoperate with that becomes much more high density and high impact. So that was a thesis that I found quite compelling, and I think applies as well.
Yeah, I think that's actually a great kind of summary and statement to end the show on. That might actually be the highlight for like the snippet because it summarizes it really well in terms of why blockchain is important to doing good, right? Why blockchain can support a lot of the work that's happening, and why even AI and people who are building large language models and working in AI are looking at blockchain as being able to create some trusted sources for the artifacts and the information that's being shared, because there is a public trust to it, right? And so I think it is going to be very interesting. And Vishal, I want to thank you so much for your time today. It hopefully people found it enlightening and see that blockchain is something that will support doing good, that it is necessary for a different type of social enterprise from what we have traditionally seen in for-profit and nonprofit organizations. And it kind of helps bring a centralization to a decentralized model. So thank you again for your time. Kind of some wrapping up. Vishal kind of put his email address in the message. You can download the messages through the little three dots. Feel free to download the notes and save them. We will also be posting this on our YouTube channel. And don't forget to register for our summit coming up on March 19th through the 21st. We have 6 sessions planned and some amazing speakers. So definitely get registered, and we look forward to seeing you there. Vishal, thank you. Christina, any last words?
No, thanks, Carlos. It's nice to be here. I hope the session was useful and interesting for folks. Like I said, yeah, like you say, put my email address there. Encourage people to come and check out Endowment, and if you've got any questions or any ideas about where we can grow or do better, very, very excited to talk about it.
Very happy to have you with us, Vishal. And I didn't expect it that this was your show, Carlos. But yeah, for me and for us right now, it's all about the summit and connecting all the dots, including blockchain and ReFi, about what can basically create a better future. And I'm very happy to be educated. And I invite you and all of our guests to our summit, and just keep close to us because we are up for some amazing things for sure. Thank you, Carlos, for this session. Amazing. I love it. I love that.
Thank you, thank you. And I enjoy it. I love this conversation. I love this space. Looking forward to doing more talks on this in the future and kind of evolving how this goes. So we'll be in touch, Vishal.
Thanks a lot.